as the saying goes. I'm sorry my parents weren't here to see that. My mother would be so proud and my father would be amazed. So thank you. Now there's a little backstory here as I begin this talk about secrets of the editorial office. Uh, I've put this together a while back, and as I started to give this talk around the world, people were always very kind, but they always were challenging. Is like, what are your credentials? What gives you the right to talk about this topic? And I, felt sort of playing catch up and had to sort of toot my own horn. So please forgive me. You just heard everything I was going to say, but maybe there's a few other things. Um, let's see why this thing doesn't advance. So you heard I'm the editor-in-chief of Lab Investigation, and that's owned by United States Canadian Academy of Pathology and published by Springer, which is now part of Nature. And I also editor for a couple of other things. And so I've had a long experience sort of being an editor. And I am the guy who can't say no. So at one point I was on the editorial board of 20 journals, and I've started to cut back now in my old age, but here's a list of the ones I'm still doing. And it's important to say that for many years, my research was funded by the NIH and by private philanthropic foundations, but there's no conflict of interest in anything I'm going to talk to you about today, other than what I've just said. And so you heard about the numbers, but here's a few others that may interest you. It always interests the dean. How many times have you been cited, Dr. Siegal? Slightly more than 18,000 times in my career. What's your H score? And for those who follow these kind of things, an H score is one measure of success as a writer. Mine happens to be 69, which means 69 of my papers have been cited by others at least 69 times. And Google Scholar uses something called the I-10 index, which basically says if you've gotten cited 10 times on any one particular paper, that's a real paper. Anything less than that, we don't think counts. And the answer for me is 256 of my peer-reviewed manuscripts have been cited at least 10 times. Okay, enough of that foolishness. So what's Lab Investigation that I've been the editor of for the last 13 years? Well, it's a journal that focuses on basic and translational pathology research. Pathology, the study of disease, basically covers everything. And although the impact factor is pretty modest compared to journals like Science or Nature, it's actually the leading American experimental pathology journal. It has an acceptance rate of about 20%, and we try to be very fast in accepting people or rejecting them so that people can get on to get their papers published. So what do I want to tell you about? And again, I've written this originally to new people, to graduate students and the postdocs who are just entering the world. So I apologize to the other distinguished faculty listening in. I'm not going to tell you anything you don't know probably better than I do. But what do you do when you're first starting? What's important? And here are the 5, I think, taken punchlines. You need to choose the right journal. There are thousands of journals. How do you pick the one that's right for you? You need to read the instructions for the authors. The abstract is critically important for your success. A picture is worth 1,000 words, trite but true, and be thoughtful. I'm going to talk about each of these in the next few slides. So, choosing the right journal. And here's a quote from a journal that I've never published, but it says an important thing. Beyond ensuring that a manuscript fulfills all the target journal's requirements, it's important to have an objective view of the scientific value of your own work. So you need to go into the corner and have a long talk with yourself and really ask the question. Sure, we'd all like to be published in the New England Journal of Medicine or Science or Nature or Cell, but is this manuscript that I have in my hand here worth that? And if the answer is no, then move on. Save yourself some time. The idea is to get it published. And now in the world of everything online, it matters a lot less. As long as it gets online, anyone and everyone can find it. The impact factor isn't the most important consideration in doing that, but it is important at some level. So I suggest that you go to the journal's website, or if you're old-fashioned like me and have the hard copy in your hand, read what the scope is as outlined by the editors. What are the policies? Are there page charges? Yes, many journals make you pay to publish. Are there color page charges? And what do some of the recent papers look like? And the manuscript I have in my hand, does that look kind of the same thing? I'm amazed, and I told you already, this is a pathology journal, but it's a human pathology journal. From time to time, I get plant pathology. And I tell them this may be the most important discovery on earth to a plant pathologist, but this is not what our journal publishes. You've just sent it the wrong place. Moving on. Read the instructions. No part of a journal is less likely to be read than the instructions to the authors, right? You just move right on and move there. That's a big mistake because more often than not, it holds up your paper being reviewed and certainly accepted. Remember that the instructions are there for a reason. They're either a publisher's requirement or aid the editors or the reviewers. Failure to follow the instructions is the most common cause of delay in peer review. And if you have to send the paper back and forth because you didn't do this or that, it's a waste of everybody's time. Accepted papers that conform to the instructions are processed quickly. So my take-home advice is read the instructions and follow them as best you can. What are the major mistakes we see all the time? Wrong reference formats. If you've ever looked in the back, the bibliography or the references in Nature don't look the same as the New England Journal of Medicine or Lab Investigation. If you don't send the so-called license to publish, the publisher won't publish it. So you have to submit that. It's a document. You may put the abstract in the wrong format or style. For example, in my journal, we don't divide the abstract into parts, introduction, methods and materials, so forth and so on. Others do. You have to have the tables and figures formatted as that journal particularly wants it. Low quality figures are a quick way to damn a paper, especially in pathology, which is a very visual discipline. Substandard English will not get you published. You can't count on the editor or the reviewers to fix your English. And if you get a review back that says, we will consider it if you fix these things, and then you never put it in a letter what you've actually done to fix it, no one's going to take the time to see if you've done it. It's just going to get rejected out of hand. Here's something that most people, even experienced people, don't appreciate enough, I don't think. Abstracts should not be prepared hastily. If anything, you should spend the most amount of time putting together the, quote, perfect abstract. Well, what is the perfect abstract? And why is it important? I, as the editor, use the abstract to decide whether or not to send the manuscript for peer review. I'd like you to think that I read your paper from start to stop, I should say, but the truth is I haven't. Why? Because I get hundreds of papers. I don't have the time. So I read the abstract, and based on that, I make a sort of thumbs up and down whether it's worthy of peer review. Also, it's important to remember that when I send it for peer review, the only thing I'm sending to the referees is the abstract saying, this titled manuscript by these authors is submitted. Here's the abstract. Are you willing to review this paper? If they don't like the abstract or can't understand it, they're going to say no. And if they say no, then I'm going to say no. Also, if you get through the entire process and now it's, quote, published, scientists, you and I, often decide whether or not to download and read the whole paper based on the abstract. So it's really an important piece of the package. It's the most important piece, perhaps. So take the time and do the abstract right. What is the perfect abstract, in my humble opinion? It has perfect English. It's around 300 words plus or minus. It has a short introduction. It has a statement of significance or novelty. It has a short materials and methods. It has a complete description of the results, and then a convincing punchline conclusion. So here it is in color. I don't expect you to read it, but I just want you to see. The introduction is in blue on the top. You see, it's just one or two sentences. The same for the significance shown in red. Then the materials and methods. Again, it just says what those techniques were, not the actual description of the techniques. We used direct sequencing. We used immunohistochemistry. We used histology, whatever it is, right there in green. And then the biggest section should be the purple, which says what were the experiments you did and what did you generally find? And then in yellow at the bottom, in one sentence or two, well, what's the value of this? What's the conclusion based on the experimental data? And there it is in yellow. So there you go, and that's a perfect one as far as size and distribution of key facts. A picture is worth 1,000 words. I don't have to spend several paragraphs describing the beauty of Japan if I have a picture like this in cherry blossom time. Everybody gets it. It's also important to know, at least in my shop, after the abstract, we look at the figures because good illustrations theoretically convey the central message of the paper quickly and clearly. Also, if you have really high quality illustrations, you can steal them for yourself and use them in lectures, review articles, et cetera, after appropriate citation. Got to again remember that the figures have to be properly sized for the particular journal that you're submitting to. Every journal is not the same. They have to have adequate resolution. And you'll see in the instructions to authors, every journal says what that resolution quality must be. You have to have legible, labeled description of what the figures are. You should not schmaltz it up too much with unnecessary embellishment, kind of just the facts, man. And then have informative legends. So here's an example or so. This is a very complicated paper and a very complicated table, but if you take a minute, it becomes real simple because here they said, you want to know how many people are in each group? Well, first of all, you can see that there are 3 groups. And it tells you in red how many patients there are in each group, how many are in the entire study, and then it provides for you a simple flow chart as it carves out and does certain experiments all the way along the way, and it shows you if there are other figures which talk about this figure more in depth. So it's kind of like a summary or centering figure, which leads you to the other one. Multi-panel figures are real important, especially in pathology papers, but many science papers. And here's one, in my opinion, that's beautifully laid out. You can see at the top, there's the histology. It's clearly labeled H and E. If you're a pathologist, you know that stands for hematoxylin and eosin staining. On the left, you see that says the top is tumor, and the next line is peritumor, and it shows you bars showing size and the magnification at the bottom. The middle set is a heat map showing key genes being up or down regulated. And then the bottom shows you a bar graph of a unique type, which shows you how these genes of interest stack up one to the other. It's very clear, it's all together, and it's in one simple figure. This becomes important if you have to pay for figures or you have to pay for color, because basically every journal charges you one price per figure. This is one figure, even though you see there's really a whole set of figures embedded in this one. And again, if you have the perfect figure in the eyes, at least of the editors or the reviewer, if you're lucky, that gets superimposed onto becoming the cover of the journal for that month or week or year, as you see I've shown you here. And that gives, I think, a lot of scientists a lot of personal satisfaction. And if you walk around UAB, you see many of these framed hanging outside the investigator's office. So a nice way, and of course, again, you can use those in your old slide presentations and whatnot down the road. Now, here's something that's especially sensitive to me because I'm a very sensitive guy. Be thoughtful in your correspondence. Try to look at the peer review process from the perspective of the reviewers who, remember, donated their time to critique your work. They're the ones you need to get on your side. It's not going to happen if you insult their competence or point out their mistakes. So this is sort of the politics of science. If you write to me and say the reviewer was a jerk, or you say to the reviewer, you're a jerk, I've seen that all the time. You obviously don't know what you're doing. I'm surprised you got this because you clearly know nothing about this field, et cetera, et cetera. How warm and fuzzy do you think that review is going to be to you going forward? It's just common sense. If you get a bad review, which I'm pretty sure if you're in this business long enough, all of you will get, like me, hundreds of times. Catch your breath. Don't respond on the day you receive it. Go outside, beat up the wife and kids, as they used to say in the old days. I'm saying don't beat up the wife and kids, but allow the hostility to bleed off. Take your time so you can reflect unemotionally to what you perceive as a bad review. Then when it's time to start crafting your response, in your written response, be more polite than you feel. You can catch more flies with honey. Be sure to address every point raised by the reviewers. Copy each concern verbatim and explain in detail what you've done to address it. It's perfectly okay to say, I humbly disagree with your reviewer number one's comments. Here's why. As opposed to, clearly you're an idiot, you don't know what you're talking about. That won't work. Okay, you need to separate what they've said and how you responded. You can do that in different fonts, in different colors, in different sizes, by bolding. So by just quickly looking, I can see what they said and you said as the editor. Again, to be diplomatic goes a long way in this business. In many fields, the fields themselves are much smaller than you think. As I showed you in the very beginning, my first or second slide, I'm on a lot of pathology journals. Basically, if you write a paper in my niche, I'm going to get it to review. So you don't want me mad at you, because if I reject it and you send it to another paper, they're going to send me the same paper to review again, your paper. You can't escape me. I know that, and you should know that. So try to be kind. Again, it doesn't mean you have to acquiesce. You can give legitimate reasons why you can't. Sometimes it's simple as, I think that's a terrific suggestion. However, that will take me 3 years and $100,000 to do that which you propose. It's not possible or practical. And I would argue that I have presented enough original novel data that it can stand on its own without doing those animal studies. You may not win the day, but oftentimes you say, you know what, the guy's right. Or in this case, the gal's right. Often that the women's side, right? You know, we understand, we've been there too. You can't spend another 100,000 in 3 years to do that really interesting study in this paper, et cetera, et cetera. Again, you notice I keep saying it over and over because I think it's so critical. When you dispute a claim, be polite, and your argument has to contain detailed evidence why you agree or disagree with the reviewer. Also, if you're not invited to resubmit, it's best to send the manuscript to a different journal instead. It's not easy to change the editor's mind because he or she has been influenced by the whole series of peer reviewers who are responding to him or her. If you write a rebuttal, show respect all the way around and disagree diplomatically. Present data to back up your allegations. Part of it is cultural. I've noticed, especially Western Europeans, receive the answer of no as the place to begin the debate. And more often than not, I try to write back to them nicely. What part of no don't you understand? We're not going to publish it. We've given you the reviewer's comments. You can't fix it. So no thank you. Now, here's a sensitive issue I know. I'm often asked if papers authored by people for whom English is not their first language are at a disadvantage in the peer review process. The emphatic answer is no. In fact, 2 of the worst written papers I've ever seen in my time in Nature came from a native English speaker based at a major UK university. I would echo that, which doesn't mean the English can't be and must be of high quality. And what I do all the time is I say, return to authors for English cleanup. And that's the phrase I used to the managing editor, who has a nice paragraph, which basically says, we think there's something here, but the English is of such a nature that we can't really judge it. Please find someone on your campus who's either a native English language speaker, or perhaps you have a service on your campus that you can, for money or other ways, get this reviewed by a professional. And if none of those work, there are fee-for-service language editing services out there, which you can find on the internet, and we list for them these 5, which obviously won't charge a fee, but often necessary. You defeat your purpose of spending all the time and effort, blood, sweat, and money to find some interesting results, but if we can't understand them, then it's lost. So you need to have your English at an acceptable level. Now I'm going to switch gears here. And this gets into the more depressing part, at least for me. But I think it's important to talk about it. And I love this from about a decade ago. It's a strange juncture in the history of moral education when a student can just as conveniently purchase a term paper for his or her ethics class or sit down and write one. So we're going to get into the shady area of cheating and all manner of badness in the publishing game. The former editor-in-chief of JAMA wrote this: "It's absolutely the responsibility of the journal editors if someone informs them of a possible problem. It's their ethical and actually legal responsibility to investigate." And we, at our journal, certainly do that, but we've had to place basically time window on it. I get all the time from, there are now professional searchers of evil in publishing who write to me and say, "We found 17 papers by this person back in the 70s and 80s that published in your journal. We think you should, get rid of them all and issue a statement saying that you're withdrawing." No, I'm not going back 50 years. It's not reasonable. Times have changed. There's no way I can really find out who's right and who's wrong, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It takes very much time and effort and a lot of mental angst to do it. So that's what I've decided arbitrarily. Remember, too, that ethics in publishing is not fixed in cement. It's a moving target. It changes over time and generations. It's highly fluid. It's often journal specific. And unfortunately, it's open to interpretation. So one has to have some degree of humility as one gets into this very difficult area. Also, you need to know if it's necessary to notify Uncle Sam, that's really pulling the fire alarm. And here's the sort of topics or sections of a review when you have to file with ORI. It takes literally years to move through this process with all manner of hearings and administrative actions and legal, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if you're at the wrong end of this, your career is tied up for 3 to 5 years while the government investigates. So one needs to be super cautious, one needs to be honest, and one needs to stay way ahead of the curve on these things. You also need to know that, unfortunately, we and others have had to become not only forensic pathologists, but forensic editors. And we use forensic tools, unfortunately, more and more to look for cheaters. Excuse me, this is one example, Droplets, which is an Adobe Photoshop desktop application, which allows you to see if the figures have been fudged or not. And what it does basically is it allows one very simply to look for discontinuities in the light and dark areas of like Western blots. It visualizes backgrounds. There's a term that they use called colorizing and solarizing. And if you see here at the very bottom, can you see these faint lines that are all different colors of the rainbow? And I'm pointing to a green one here, and there's some blue ones in the middle, and a yellow one here, and a blue one here. If you look at the Western, you can't see those. But when you put it through this application, they stand up. And you can see very clearly that the control was not part of this gel. It was added after the fact to the dilution curve. So this was all done in the same experiment, but this was not. This was cut and pasted on here. And you cannot tell that with the naked eye, but through these techniques, you can tell it, et cetera, et cetera. There's also another system we use, there are many out there, called iAuthenticate, which says, does the text overlap with what's in the peer-reviewed literature? And when one runs the manuscript through it, out pops a very detailed, so the actual manuscript's on the left and the review is on the right, line by line. item by item, phrase by phrase, how much overlap is there. And then at the end, it tells you you have like a score. There is 16% overlap with this paper and other papers. To make a long story short, this would suggest that there is no plagiarism. But it's not always easy to tell just based on that number. So here's a great example of that. Notice that the number on the upper right-hand corner is 32%. Authenticates as a third of this paper is a duplicate. Wouldn't you think that was inappropriate plagiarism? It just so happens to be by the senior associate editor of Lab Investigation, Dr. Umezawa, is a very distinguished Japanese pathologist. And he gave me permission to show this. And the answer is actually no. There is no plagiarism here, as long as you understand that the similarities are basically all sitting in the materials and methods. So for example, you can see in this ethical statement is made by the Japanese government. It has to appear in every Japanese publication. Okay, so by definition, it's going to be the same in every Japanese publication. And here it's a description of human cells that he uses. And there's only so many ways to say these particular cells with Down syndrome are these particular cells. There's only so many ways to say whether or not this is a Western blot and how you describe the Western blot. So, of course, you have to go through it line by line. But once you remove the methods and materials that are appropriately, if you will, copied from paper to paper, and the author's names and the author's institutions and ethical statements demanded by the government, there is none. The actual data is all novel and unique. So let me give you some examples of other things. There's not enough time to cover it all, but I just want to sort of hit some highlights. A reviewer alerts us to a fact that a paper he was reviewing for us was also sent to him to review from another journal. The corresponding author, PI, claims he didn't know that the postdoc sent the paper to us. That was when we asked him, what the hell's going on here? There's a problem, though. The author has to agree in writing, sign a statement saying that all authors agreed to the submission. Clearly, they didn't if they didn't claim that he didn't even know about it. He's the PI. He said, I didn't know the postdoc sent it to you. But he signed the statement saying he's aware of it and everybody's aware of it. That's a co-author on the paper. Also, we go the extra step. Once we get a paper, we send to the PI and all the co-authors a message that says, we received your manuscript. It's moving to peer review. And that gives them a second chance to say, whoa, we didn't realize that we actually sent it to somebody else at the same time. That's not allowed. And he never notifies us until we caught him. So what did we do? Well, left us no choice. We rejected the paper and we told him he was prohibited from submitting to us for the next 3 years. Does that make a difference in the grand scheme of things? I don't know. But short of going to his house and killing him, that's about the only thing we can reasonably do. Falsifying data. So here's a letter that comes out at the end of a very long, complicated story, and it summarizes it quickly. We received your letter dated so-and-so. The following retraction statement will appear. Following correspondence from a concerned reader regarding the article entitled so-and-so, the editors commenced an inquiry into the validity of the results reported. Initial communication between the editorial office and the corresponding author failed to resolve the matter. In other words, they ignored us. Therefore, the editors, contacted the university hospital, with which all the authors are affiliated, and requested them to do an investigation. The director of the hospital, the dean of the graduate school, talked to the dean of the medical school. They appointed an investigative committee. The committee concluded, excuse me, that the article in question contained falsified data. Dr. M has confessed to fabricating the data on 5 of the 7 patients and falsifying the supporting figures. He said these actions were his alone, and none of the other co-authors were involved or aware of these events. The article is therefore being retracted from the journal by the publisher with the concurrence of all the other co-authors. And you'd think that was more than enough to leave it there. However, after some period of time, I received this letter. Dear Dr. Siegal, I am the president of the university involved with the scandal perpetrated by Dr. M against its colleagues and against science. It's my sad duty to inform you that shortly after following his admission of guilt, Dr. M committed suicide. This has been a difficult and sad time for all, but I thought it appropriate that you be informed. As you can imagine, this broke my heart. So this is not something that I do trivially. We have an obligation to seek out the truth, but we need to do it in as humane a fashion as we reasonably can. And I like to leave with this because it gives me strength when I see things like this. The time is always right to do what is right. So says the Reverend Dr. King. So we're at the end, and I just need to thank all the people that helped with this, the managing editor, Catherine Ketchum, my senior associate editors, the folks at UAB who helped me from day to day and moment to moment, and the owner of USCAP and Springer. So thanks for listening. I hope you got something of interest out of this. I hope you're not too depressed now. It's an exciting time to be publishing in America and around the world, and I'm happy to answer any and all questions.
I have a question in the context of COVID-19.
Yes.
So there's this urgency for information, and people are working furiously to try to get information out there, but veracity is more important than ever, right? So how does this impact the role of editors and then also authors?
Well, actually, the one I think is most impacted are the reviewers, because there aren't millions of reviewers who are experts on COVID. And we have a UAB paper from the Department of Genetics that was cited already. Now, right, it started like February, March, 7,000 times. So people are reading it, people are acting on it. So I'm totally dependent on the goodwill of the scientists who are killing themselves in their own labs trying to do this and get it out and reviewing their colleagues' work. That's what science is all about. And I have to take them at their word all up and down, the pathway and hope for the best. And even though it's critically important, we still subject it to peer review and hope that that will save the day for us at the end. But as we all know, there's lots of sort of false starts and random tangents that happen in science anyway. So.
Thank you. Okay, so we have another one coming in from Maggie. It says, regarding authenticate, an author has a long history of publishing on a topic. Is it acceptable to self-plagiarize?
The answer is usually not, but again, in certain things like methods and materials, I allow maximal flexibility. Other journals may not as much, as I say, how many ways can you write about how you do a Western blot? Mm-hmm. So, and I publish a lot myself. So it's sometimes the grass is green, the green grass, you spin it around a little bit to try to make it a little different. So I think people try to be reasonable. And if something comes up, then a dialogue between the editors, the reviewers, and the authors sometimes are necessary so that everyone feels reasonably comfortable. We've gone back to authors saying, we like this paper, but there's too much overlap with your previous work as far as sentence construction. Can you please go through these sections and revise them? And most authors do.
I have a question while you review the box, Lauren, and see if
Yep.
you know you have any additional questions. So, do you have any advice for young faculty or postdocs, you know, that want to start being reviewers? What is the best way to go about that?
So we actually started about 10 more years ago a program at Lab Investigation where we wrote to the top, I want to say 50 or 60 pathology departments in the United States, top meaning based on NIH funding, and said, we realize you have to learn how to review just like everything else. So can you recommend some up and coming advanced residents, fellows, junior faculty that would like that experience? And then people sent in their suggestions. We culled it to a reasonable number, I think about 24 young people, young in science. I don't know what their actual age was. And what we did was we gave them the paper to review as well as the normal senior reviewers. And then we sent the senior reviewers, after the junior people sent to me, we sent them the senior reviewers' reviews. So they could say, oh, I forgot, I didn't see that, I understand, I didn't, whatever. And for those reviews that were right on the money and perfect, we sent those to the authors and said, you got 3 reviews on this paper, or 4, whatever it was. And for those that weren't up to speed, the young people got the feedback from the other reviewers, but the authors weren't bothered by that. You know, it's like everything else. See one, do one, teach one. You know, you have to start someplace. It doesn't come to you anymore like any other part of science. So this is our attempt to train up a new generation of reviewers. And now, after a decade, we have a whole bunch that have matured up. They've joined the faculty, they've grown up, and they are senior reviewers now. So that's how we do it.
I'm not seeing any other questions from the Q&A box. I had one other COVID-19 related question though, just from something
Sure.
I remember a colleague mentioning. About a month ago, they were waiting a very long time to hear back for their paper to go into review. So during all of this, is there a backlog? I know people are having, you know, a hard time just getting papers into the review process. Is that taking longer than normal?
So if, I don't know if I can go all the way back, I don't need to, but we have a really fast turnaround, 30 something days. And we tell the reviewers, our expectation is you're going to turn around this paper once we send it to you in a few days. If you cannot, for whatever reason, turn it around, let us know and we'll send it to somebody else. So to not hold it up. But I got to tell you, there's the other side of the coin. When I first started, every paper came to me as the editor-in-chief, and it still does. And I make the decision whether or not it's good enough to be sent out for review. People were sending me their papers, let's pick a time, 9 a.m. At 9:10, they had the answer back, rejected. And people were freaking out, saying, I just spent 3 years of my life, and you just in 5 minutes or 10 minutes rejected my paper? What a jerk you are. So it taught me, I now sit on them for a couple of days, even though I made a decision. I read the abstract. It doesn't apply, or it's irrelevant, or it's poorly written, or the science is bad, or whatever. It's not going to make it. So why we bother everybody to review it? I only send out about half of all the manuscripts we get go for review. And of those, you know, as I say, at the end of the day, only about 20% finally get accepted. So it's very competitive. We understand that. But there are other journals that are less competitive. So, and I like to tell the young people that I mentor, there is a home for every paper. Your job is to find that home. Pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and send it someplace else.
Thank you. I don't think we have any other questions in the Q&A Ah,
I've got a quick question though.
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Siegal, I don't know if supplemental data or video resources are happening in medical journals right now, but it is a growing trend in more of the life sciences. So I'm wondering if you have any recommendations as a reviewer editor, specifically with video, as I think there's going to be a lot more video incorporation of obviously pertinent data as the web and internet sources become more valuable.
Well, I know most people think pathology is dead science, but I think of it as a life science. But the truth is, video has not really caught up with standard conventional medical publishing in the pathology world. There is a lot of supplemental, and part of that is sort of a ongoing discussion, debate, often with the authors, what should go in the primary and what should go in the supplemental. And we are talking, but I'm not made any sort of definitive statement about should, for example, supplemental only go online. Right now, it goes into the text, into the hard copy, as well as online. So it's evolving, and we will have to deal with it. Pathology, like every other discipline, is becoming more and more sort of enamored by artificial intelligence and all these other sort of cutting edge technologies that will demand that we deliver the product in different ways. And I used to say, you know, I'm so old, I used to use Kodachrome.
Yay, it's good stuff.
You know, and Zoom was like, what are you kidding me? There's no way you can do any of that stuff. So, you know, you have to learn with the times. I think I agree with you. It's coming. We have not gotten there quite yet. So I guess my last parting shot should be everybody join Sigma Xi. It's a great organization. It needs young people especially. I always had a warm heart in it because I was one of the first ones when I was a graduate student to say what you're doing is worthwhile, and we're going to elect you to membership. That made all the difference to me, and I'm sure it's still good today. So we ought to encourage our postdocs, our graduate students, and our junior faculty, and our senior faculty to join and be active in it. And this campus does a pretty good job of doing these kind of things. So thank you all as the leadership for doing that. And thank you for the invitation. And I'm going to go to my next Zoom meeting. So everybody have a great day.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Bye.